If we start our assembly with a part open, then we're going to see it show up in the begin assembly. So going in template, doing the assembly. So instead of browsing, I have it in the selection list here. If we look down through the rest of these, there's no configuration, or at least I don't think there's any configuration, so it's just at the default. If we do the automatic browse, it will launch that Windows, and we can go to the folder and pick the file. We want the graphics preview, which means as I'm dragging it around, I'm seeing where it's going. Envelope would be the size, kind of the limits, well, the envelope of the part. And show rotate, which I'm not seeing, so not sure if it's not in the first or anyway. There should be a little box that allow me to rotate this around. So if that shows up somewhere, no, pulling it out a little bit. All right, so if I just hit the checkbox, that is the situation where I've created it in the part, the orientation that I wanted in the assembly, so I can just go ahead and hit OK. It has the F in front of it because it's fixed, and this is one of the places where it's okay or acceptable to work with those. So if this is the situation, you brought it in, you hit the checkbox, it goes origin of the assembly to the origin of the part, and everything's located that way, then you're fine. If it doesn't, if it comes in some other way, then if you have the F, you'll want to float. If this says fixed, leave it alone. Or, yeah, fixed, because it's alternating back and forth. So if I float it, it goes to the minus sign, and then the other one is the rotate. So if I move this off and we go back into the rotate component, and I kind of just do one of those. So it comes in at some weird angle, some weird orientation, and we need to locate this and put it in the right orientation. And so this would be, we only have the front planes of the assembly. There's not any other parts to work with. So if I pre-select the front plane, then go into the paperclip, the mate, and then I could pick the back. It doesn't go the way that I want it, so we're either going to, in the pop-up, flip the mate alignment, or come back over to the property manager and flip the mate alignment. So still behaving a little bit weird, but okay. Once we're in this box, I don't have to do any controls or selects. We're just picking. I do want to use the flyout to be able to pick that next plane. So the bottom of the part to the top plane of the assembly, and then checkbox since it's popping up. And I'm not sure why it's not accepting it other than it's right there. All right, so now it's still able to move. And you notice that when I rotated it before, because there weren't any mates, there was really no constraint on this at all. And so the face to the right plane will shift it over, and then OK. And then we can OK, and that will clear it out. So now I'm back as if I had brought it in and left it fixed to the origin. If I try to move this up, down, sideways, inside out, it's not going to go anywhere. So we're ready to bring in our next part. For ease of use on our first real assembly, we're going to insert the component, browse, and we're doing the individual parts. So this will be the pin long. And if you're doing this as the configurations, then I'll do a separate video with the configuration. But really just want to place it. There's another tool that we'll introduce that can speed this up. But for now, we're going to go through all of the steps. So if I pick the cylinder and hold down the control button and pick the inside face of the cylinder, and we go into the mate. Well, it threw it out there in space a little ways, which is always a problem. And if I flip the mate alignment, it threw it out the other way, but it's in the correct orientation, the way that I'm wanting it to go. So I thought they had cured that at one point, but apparently not so much. All right, so when I pick the inside face of the flange and the back face of the base, that is going to bring those two together. And other than it can rotate, which we can't even really tell that it rotates, but if I had caught the coincident, and if we pull this out, or I'm sorry, the concentric is the one with the little, with the circles, and when that is clear, if I lock the rotation, I think it'll let me back into that. We'll double check it real quick. So if I go to the very bottom mates, that is all of the mates available in the in this assembly. So concentric, and then if I just want to see the mates for that part, we expand out next to the part, little arrow next to mates, and if that's filled in, then it's set to lock rotation or not rotate. All right, we're going to bring in the crank. And so if I don't use the insert components here, I'm going to use this insert component existing part in assembly. And it jumps back into the property manager for bringing in the next part. And then this will be the crank. All right, we get it close to position. And then I can do the same kind of thing here where I go coincident. So select and control select is still going to be faster because you're going to get that pop-up. Initially, if you go up to the paper clip and you've pre-selected, it's going to jump to coincident, or if it's one of our cylinders, then it's going to jump to concentric. So to start off with, we're going to be using those two mates quite a bit. So I accept it, and then the inside of the crank, and if I rotate this over, I'm looking for the outside, and that can be a little tricky. You've got to look through that geometry to find it, especially when it kind of goes transparent. And we go concentric. Right? Intent is that this will be able to rotate, and probably the last mate that I add will make it put it in a static position. All right, so going through the process, staying with one component at a time, bring it in, make sure that it works, that it's doing what you want it to do before you go to the next one, because if I bring in all 6 of those parts, it's going to be quite a bit different to organize and see which ones I'm really trying to work with. So coincident, cylinder inside to cylinder outside, concentric, and again with the rotation, I don't care if it rotates on this on these really. The only difference is the minus sign, and because the crank, until we do some kind of locating dimension, that's going to move anyway. All right, so repetition on this process. Insert component, browse. We're going to find the coupler. Hit OK. Bring it in, get it close. Because the concentric kind of threw it out in space, I'm going to go with the coincident first. And select control, select the faces. And if we go coincident there, then it will jump right in. And I won't ever see that that mate property manager. If I'm in the mate property manager and we have the little blue box, I don't have to hold down the control button. I can go right to the selections, and then since it conveniently pops up right there, we can finish the mate. So at this point, I need another short pin. So this would be a good place to hold down the control button, select the pin from the work area or the pin. I think it's a little bit safer maybe to pull it from the components. And if I drag it out close and let go, then I will get another instance of that part. So let's see, this you're going to get really good at the middle mouse button rotate and the scroll wheel zoom. Being able to see and put this in the right orientation to make these selections. So again, I'm a pre-selector, so if I select and control select, even if I go into the paper clip and it jumps right to coincident, then accept it, and then inside of the cylinder to the outside of the cylinder. All right, looks pretty good, and I'm thinking through the process of, did I do that right? Is it going the right way? Because the other thing, well, if I were to flip the mate alignment, it'd put the flange inside of the coupler, which doesn't really do us any good. So um, kind of go through that process and do the error checking as you go. Insert component, browse, we're bringing in the follower, and we can place it. And this time I will just go into the mate, little blue box, pick, rotate over, try and figure out where it's at. And again, the zoom is at the center of the mouse. So if I want to zoom in on this, I put the mouse over it and I zoom by moving the scroll wheel up and down. If I can't see something, it makes it that much harder to select. So we want to uh, make those selections as easy and convenient as possible. All right, so if it's too close together, we'll just grab the part, one of the parts, and move, get a little separation on them, and select. It shows up in the little blue box, and select, and then we can hit OK. And then as this moves around and does whatever it does, we can go back, get out of the mate, and we're going to be bringing in another long pin. So if I do the long pin out of the work area, same basic process. I'm going to hold down the control button, select the pin, and drag it to some location so that I can see it successfully. And it's a key combination that takes a little bit of practice that you will probably miss at least a couple times. All right, so select, control, select, coincident, select, control, select, concentric, select, control, select, and concentric. All right, so it kind of did a weird little jump there, but that got it into place. All right, so this is going to be practice, 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 and seeing all of these mates and going through all of this process. And we need to decide, do we want this to be static or dynamic? Going into the manufacturing side, whatever this is doing, if we're driving this with a motor, if it's pulleys and belts or some other creating some kind of intermittent motion, that it can go through its movement, that whatever we're producing here, we'll want to look at that and do the constraints, because just a press fit and an unconstrained slip fit between those couplers, the pins, and the arms is not going to do us that much good. So one of the things I can prepare for the drawing is to kind of put this in a position, and control 1, looks pretty good for the front view. And if I control select and we go into the mate, it's going to jump to probably parallel. And parallel is one of those good safe, we don't use it that much, but it doesn't create a lot of conflicts if there is not coincident or there's not some type of geometry to work from. So I'm going to set an angle. If I come down to the angle, 45 degrees, if I flip the dimension, then it reverses, but that looks good. If I flip the mate alignment, it reverses the other way. So there's like 4 possibilities of that mate. So by applying that mate, then the pins still show up as being underdefined because they can rotate, but everything else is stationary. So 45 degrees is kind of an arbitrary number, and it doesn't really help or hurt us. But on the configuration side, or when we go into the drawing, and make an alternate position for this piece, then it will create a configuration for us and we will pick another location so we can show the limits of travel or some of the method. So the takeaway is we're going to put these in position coincident for our planar surfaces, concentric, and occasionally throw in a parallel or a angle or distance dimension.